Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics.
Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Carl Carlson.
And this is Fred Schenkelberg. Hey, Carl.
Hey, Fred. Got a interesting question from a reader that I'd love to share with you and talk about.
All right, cool.
It's on the FMEA subject broadly, but it really applies to just about anything that we do. So we'll talk about it from the broader standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And the reader says, does a facilitator have to have deep understanding of the topic that he or she is facilitating? And that just set me back. I'm going, wow, I love that topic. I mean, I've written about it. I've almost got a chapter in my book about it.
Yeah.
I have experience in it. And it would just be, I'd love to talk it over with you, see what your views are as well, and see where that goes.
Well, the first one I'm thinking of is there was an example of probably the wrong deep knowledge.
Okay.
This person it was a meeting to figure out what should be updated in a body of knowledge. I'll leave it generic. And so there was a collection of random people that we'd first met. And there was, 15, 20 of us. So it was a good sized group. And the woman facilitating it was a professional meeting facilitator for updating bodies of knowledge and similar type activities, where it's a group of strangers that have knowledge of that domain would get together, and then the facilitator has particular marching orders, like we should only guidelines, I should say, is we should only update a certain percentage of things, and we have to make sure that it's inclusive language. And so she brought, and I was in a couple of these meetings, and so I'll just say they brought deep knowledge about their contract and what they were allowed and not allowed to do, and were pretty versatile with English and word choice to avoid biases and stuff like that. And so I thought that was good. Yet the one example that immediately jumped to mind, she was horrible at running a meeting. Just the basics of, have an agenda. Here's the, basic timing. We were late to lunch every day, and that, they'd bring in lunch and set it on the counter beside us. And then, 45 minutes later, all right, let's take a break for lunch. And there was no rhyme or reason to why we couldn't have broke earlier or not. It was just whatever, stuff like that. Just the basics. And then she had absolutely no knowledge at all of the domain of what the topics we were talking about in this body of knowledge. And that got in the way because she would go, well, I don't understand that, so we can't put it in here. Well, you're not an expert. You're not one of us. You've never worked a day in your life in reliability engineering.
How dare you?
Yeah. And you're vetoing stuff and I said, that is about as bad a facilitator as I could have gotten.
That leaves the gauntlet down at one end.
Yeah.
Far end of the spectrum.
There are better cases. Hopefully everybody has had many, many meetings and events that were facilitated much better than that one. But I've had a bad experience.
Yes. Well, it's good to have the lesson learned. I go back many years on the subject because when I managed GM's reliability group, I had to answer this question because we got all the design engineers and manufacturing engineers very interested in FMEAs, and I wanted them involved. I don't want to do FMEAs for people. It's a team activity. But then the question becomes about facilitating. So we tried, I'll call them neutral facilitators or facilitators that don't understand the topic, bring them in from the outside, that kind of thing. And it just fell flat. It did not work. And then we also tried make the expert in the design do the facilitation of the design FMEA.
Yeah.
And that didn't work either.
Yeah. Let me postulate a couple of reasons why either one didn't work. In my experience, then the engineers will have to explain themselves. They're educating the facilitator half the time.
Yeah.
And it might even be just the facilitator gets the, like, what are you talking about? Look, it's just body language. And they go, let me explain. This is why this is important. We got to do this. And you spent half your time explaining to the facilitator, and they're not pulling their role to say, no, you don't need to tell me, move on. As long as you guys understand it, it's fine. The other one, the expert running it, is they have an inherent power in the group. Yeah. And nobody's going to disagree. Or they play a perfect facilitator role, and they don't put on their engineering hat. They don't bring their knowledge to the table. And then the group loses that knowledge. It doesn't have the benefit of that insight. So it can either be they totally dominated, sometimes unwittingly, and other times they don't contribute. And I'm like, yeah, we kind of need that knowledge.
So let's parse this out. Because I've ended up in the middle on the subject. I don't want to have expert facilitators that don't know anything about the product. Mm-hmm. They're just like outside consultants. And I don't want to take for the reasons you describe and some other reasons, don't want to take the design expert and put that person as facilitator unless they're also trained in facilitation skills.
Yep.
And cannot and then know how not to dominate the meeting. Mm-hmm. And so what this came down to me, Fred, is the importance of understanding the skills of facilitation. And there are specific skills, and they're different than the engineering skills of the topic. And so I developed a course that I've been teaching for the last 20 years on facilitator training, mm-hmm. really focused around FMEA. And it comes down to specific skills, such as the ability to encourage participation is a skill, or how to use questioning in the meeting for thought starters.
And also how to shut down somebody that's trying to dominate.
How to
control. Not alienate them, not shut everybody else down too. That's a subtle
It's interesting. When I surveyed, and I've done this for years, I surveyed teams as to their experience on facilitators and meetings, and what is the most important skill. And it comes up uniformly as controlling discussion. And that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's not, I don't think controlling is the right word. All right, Bill, you can say 3 words now. All right, Sarah, what's your 3-word response? No, there's a subtle dance with that. It's getting a balance of inputs, and everybody presents in different ways or brings ideas to the table in different ways, but creating a safe place so that you can have a discussion. The team can have a discussion that's open and honest and allows people that are inherently, either are intimidated because of the other expertise that's in the room, or heaven forbid there's a manager in the room, or this personal bias. No offense, Carl.
Really?
And but creates. I think it's not control the meeting or control the discussion. It's to create a safe environment so a discussion can occur. If people are guarded because they are afraid of what they think others will think of them, because they have an idea or dissenting opinion or just whatever, then they're not going to raise their hand or not going to say anything. And so I think and then it's the other half of that is the control of, and what it's like, Carl, is you get so how could this fail? And the first thing that said is, it could turn blue. And then 2 engineers jump up to the board and start working out the chemical composition of the thing and say, all right, this is great. We're done. We're out of here.
Yeah. These are not easy skills, and they have to be learned. And what you're describing, I completely agree with. I'll call it encouraging participation, which means basically getting a balanced input from all the team members, including introverts as well as extroverts. So you balance the input, and that means you have to control to some degree the extroverts so they don't dominate the meeting, and you have to learn how to draw out the introverts. There's a lot to this discussion, but let me just circle back to the to the topic
The
as
domain
to whether the
knowledge, yeah.
facilitator needs to have knowledge.
Yeah.
And I come out in the middle on this. I think I don't want a facilitator that doesn't understand anything about what's being facilitated, what the topic is.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, they don't have to be expert. So if I'm facilitating, I will do my own research on the product. I'll get the product drawings, I'll get the product specifications, I'll immerse myself in it for a little while, because as you described, I don't want the team explaining things to me.
I think
I want
as a
to
minimum,
understand.
yeah, the minimum you need to do is know the language. When they say it's a flash gold, you have an idea what that is. That's a coating that's chemically deposited in a very, very thin level. You don't need to know exactly how it's done. You don't need to, know all the specs on it, but the terminology in and around that particular item you're working with, you should have an idea. Know the difference. I was working on an FMEA for a ventilator years ago, and knowing the difference between a compressor, and the solenoids that controlled the airflow is like, if I didn't know what those were, I'd have no idea what they were talking about. Yet having just basic terminology and concept of the product, I think is a minimum.
That is a minimum. And then so the terminology is important, and maybe at a high level, how the product works, which can be, 1 or 2 hours of preliminary work just to look at the system.
Well, sit down with an engineer and, somebody that's familiar with the system and concept and walk through it. It's what we bring to the table in FMEA is the FMEA knowledge, the facilitation piece of it. Yet part of that role as a facilitator is you have to know when you're in a rat hole. Is what I'm thinking of.
That's a good way to describe it. I was thinking you have to keep the meeting on track. In other words, if you're talking about the compressor and someone brings up something about some other component or subsystem, you have to be able to say, hey, look, we're talking about the compressor right now. Let's get back to that. I'll make a note of that and come back to that later.
Well, that's where
it just goes all over the
Carl,
place.
that's where it gets really fuzzy, though, is to say, yes, we're talking about the compressor right now. See, I would respond to that if somebody brings up, say, the solenoid. Is there an interaction that you're bringing up, or are you on a different on the solenoid itself? We'll get to the solenoid, but if there's an interaction piece, explain that. And that's where having enough knowledge about the concept of operation and basic layout of the components and stuff like that, or how it's manufactured, then you can make that decision. The other clue I get is your own knowledge of the domain to be able to say, is that related? How so? Which guides them into an interaction with the topic at hand, or recognize that that's completely different. We'll table that until we get to it. Good idea. Let's get to that in a minute. Make a note, whatever. The other piece is that it signals to the rest of the group that, when we focus on one area, it's okay to think about other stuff, yet it better be related to this topic right now, otherwise we get derailed. And that's where it becomes really hard to do, because if you shut down this other person's brilliant idea that might end up being the one thing we got to deal with, they may never bring it up again or anything else. And it dissuades other people from bringing up ideas out of context. And that's where I think a brilliant facilitator is able to navigate. How do I acknowledge that idea, capture it in a way that we know that we're going to get to, and move on with the topic at hand, efficiently, without damaging the ability or the willingness for other people to contribute.
That's really good topic, and let's explore that for a minute. And because I completely agree, you want the team to feel like they can contribute and they're making a difference, and so they come up. And the worst meetings I've ever been in are ones where the facilitator says, "Okay, you have 1 minute to talk," and they go around the room and they keep going around the room, and that's just a horrible method, in my opinion.
Yeah, everybody's talking past each other at that point.
Yeah, they're talking past each other. They're thinking about what they're going to say, because sometimes a given topic if it's on topic and it is fruitful, to use that word,
Mm-hmm.
I want to explore it. I want to deepen on it.
Mm-hmm.
Other things that are not really helpful, we'll just let the person finish what they're saying and then move on. So as a facilitator, you have to have some knowledge of what is meaningful in the domain you're working in so that you can dig deeper when you hit, to use the mining term, the mother lode.
Yep.
You want to go in there further. And so that is quite a skill, takes at least some knowledge as an overview of what the topic that you're dealing with, and it takes really good facilitation skills. So let's explore deeper your comment, Fred, which I agree with completely. So someone brings up a widget, and you're talking about compressor, and they say, oh yeah, by the way, on this widget, I can see what the problem we're going to run into. And let me just not try to answer the question right there, but just explore it with you. What should the facilitator do? This person, you want to acknowledge and let the widget conversation or the originator know that you recognize how important that is, but it may not be the thing that you want to explore at that given moment. How would you go about that?
Well, if you're prepared well, and it's one of the reasons I don't like having computers in an FMEA session.
Yes,
because everybody's on a different screen, and there's even a big screen TV on the wall is not big enough, and so
a text comes in from somebody they got to look at.
Yeah, so I like laying out the drawings on the table. Let's say it's a product, product design, a design FMEA, and we're looking at, say, this compressor, and a product that has a compressor and a few other components in it. And here's the drawing. Here's where the compressor sits. Here's where the solenoid sits. Here's where the control panel is, and so on. Or we even have actual mock-ups or prototypes or something like that in the room, right? So the drawing is my favorite because it's a big drawing laying on the table, and I either put a Post-it on it, or if I'm bold enough and I know that this is printed just for this meeting, I'll circle it, and going, if we haven't got it on the list, say the failure modes that we're exploring or whatever method we're using to lay this out, I'll tag it and saying, is there an interaction with the compressor that's relevant to the compressor operation? And if it's yes, we add it to the compressor discussion, because if you only look at individual components, you miss all that interface stuff, which, as you know, can be a significant issue. And so it was like, all right, we'll add it to the discussion, and then it's kind of read the room. Is this something we want to explore more? Somebody else says, what do you mean it changes that, or this temperature changes this distance, or it interferes with this valve or whatever. All right, let's explore that. But it's a split-second decision, or it's just something about this other component and it's not related. Right? All right, circle it, tag it, put it on the board, write it down. We'll get to that. And
okay,
that's
so
how I do
to jump right in there. That I totally agree. That sounds really good. So in that circumstance where you write it down, you make an acknowledgement. I'm thinking out loud here, that at that point you're observing and making sure that whoever originated about the widget, and you've determined that there's not an interaction thing to bring into the scope, that you want to be sure that person knows that their contribution is valuable and that we will get to it, and then it's appreciated.
And I find that as facilitating something is, like a new product and has 28,000 components in it, or however many are in it, is you have to write it down. And you have to have a system in place that you remember to go back to it. Because as soon as you miss one of those, the trust in the room that the facilitator will come back to that topic is gone. So now it's, it becomes a balance. If I'm going to suggest something and you, in the next 2 hours, we'd never come back to it, we went right over that area and didn't come back to that topic or idea, then you just shut down everybody else that's saying, oh, you're going to get to it.
And so why bother?
Why bother? I either force it through right now, or he's only going to listen to what he wants to listen to.
Yeah.
And I find having some domain knowledge allows you to judge it yourself. And the hard part there is that you're not an expert on that product design. And so the other, I think almost as important and that's the part where the chief architect of the product or the lead engineer for the product or somebody with a lot of deep knowledge about that thing that we're talking about tends not to have is the ability to read the room and go, oh, this is actually important. And it might be eyebrows. It might be where they're looking. It might be how they're breathing. It might be leaning in. There's all these little subtle clues that say, she's onto something there. We need to talk about that without anybody saying anything.
I like what you said about reading the room and the importance, because what I was thinking about, which aligns with that, is the facilitator has to have enough knowledge about the topic so that he or she can prioritize where the meeting is going.
Yep.
And so you're reading the room, you're observing, you can see this is really important. And that comports with your general knowledge of the system. And so you can prioritize that. So to answer the person's question about does a facilitator have to have a deep understanding of the topic, I think the answer is they have to have some knowledge of the topic, enough to be able to know in general what's being talked about, as you pointed out, the terminology involved, enough so that the facilitator can help prioritize where the meeting goes, but does not have to be an expert in the topic.
Yeah. And the right answer is it's sufficient knowledge. And that's fuzzy because, and I don't like giving those kinds of answers. It's some knowledge. I don't know what the right term is yet. It's more than you've never, ever heard of this technology before. It's not that you're the inventor of it.
Sufficient knowledge in order to, and then we have to fill in the blank.
Yeah. In order to understand what the conversation is about. Is it on topic or not on topic, or which topic it's on? Some level of understanding of potential interactions and pieces like that. The hard part for a facilitator is keeping your own bias out of it, your own domain knowledge of, say, for like me, it's reliability. I go, well, you need to talk about those capacitors some more because they really are a problem sometimes.
Well, what I do when I facilitate, because that's a harmonic of this topic, is, can a facilitator have an opinion? And what I'll do is I'll say, okay, I'm going to take my facilitator hat off for a minute. And I'm just going to talk about my experience in this from this point of view. And then I'll offer that experience. And then I put the facilitator hat back on.
Yep.
Because I don't think we have the luxury of, there just aren't enough people to economically have neutral facilitators. So you end up, the facilitator is going to have some opinion, but they have to be able to differentiate and not use that opinion to control the outcome.
Yep. Yep. Oh, I've been tempted to control the outcome a few times. There's been no doubt.
It's much more fun to control the outcome.
It's not, I mean, the goal of getting the team to see the value in it, they all benefit from the experience and from the discussions and so on, is not facilitated, no pun intended, by a facilitator dominating the outcome. So you got to keep the objective in mind, is that we want the inputs and insights from these different people that were selected to be in this group in order for us to collectively come up with the right outcome, an appropriate outcome that we all have consensus on and can take action on and go forward with. And
no one dominates.
Yeah. And if there's somebody's dominating, that's not going to happen. If it's just a generic discussion and we could have opened up your book for an example in the back of it on a bicycle, and that would have been just as appropriate for this other product, we're not doing ourselves justice. That the facilitator's role is, you got to do your homework and understand what the discussion's about, what the product's about. And I think it's sufficient so that you can help avoid the pitfalls, avoid somebody dominating it, avoid the technical discussion being held against you as a facilitator. Those kinds of things. You need to know enough to recognize the potholes and the problem areas and guide it towards an area where the team is working together to achieve a more better reliable product.
Very good. That's a good summary, Fred. I don't know about the English of more better, but
I always say that because I use that in my sixth grade she'd bring out the English lessons and it says, "Oh, it's time for the more better stuff."
Yes.
And she'd just roll her eyes.
If you're a listener and you have some experience in either receiving facilitation that could be improved, or have done facilitation and you want to weigh in on this topic of how much knowledge should the facilitator have, we would love to hear from you, because this is an open subject.
Yeah, it very much is. And there's a bunch of corollaries to this one. I'm kind of like, I got to take some notes here. You can actually talk to us. We have, and I checked it yesterday to make sure it was still working, is that when you go to accendoreliability.com/go/SOR, there's a button there for a speak pipe, which is an application that allows you to push a button and use your microphone to record us, basically a voice message. And, if it's something that we want to use for the show, we'll put it on air if it's okay with you. Also has a comment field there if you're more comfortable typing, or you could dictate it to your typing system. There's too many options here, Carl. Or, you can get a hold of Carl or I or the other hosts of the show through LinkedIn and through our About pages. Even our comments on our articles on the site, we often talk about. So plenty of ways for you to get in touch with you, but we certainly would like to hear from you.
Absolutely.
All
Good
right.
round off.
Well, thanks so much, Carl. We'll talk to you again soon.
Talk to you soon, Fred.
Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.